A brave Navy SEAL and his loyal German Shepherd risked absolutely everything in a freezing, violent hurricane to save a billionaire CEO from her sinking luxury yacht. But instead of a simple thank you, she repaid their incredible heroism with a vicious, cowardly lie, framing the innocent soldier to save her own fortune and locking the hero dog in a cold, terrifying metal cage. She was completely convinced her millions could easily silence the truth and destroy a good man's life forever. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The thick, heavy mud of the coastal pine forest clung stubbornly to David's boots as he carefully navigated his way through the dense, thorny brush. He was a tall, broad-shouldered Navy SEAL with a sharp jawline, rough stubble, and short, practical dark hair. Despite the grueling nature of this week-long survival training, he moved with a quiet, practiced ease. His NWU Type 3 digital woodland camo blended seamlessly with the damp green surroundings of the wild coastal terrain, making him nearly invisible among the trees. Right beside him, matching his pace perfectly, trotted Bruno. Bruno was a large, muscular German Shepherd with an alert posture, thick black and tan fur, and deep, highly intelligent brown eyes. Bruno was much more than just a standard military working dog. He was David's trusted partner, his most loyal friend, and occasionally his biggest headache. The current training exercise was specifically designed to push both man and dog to their absolute physical and mental limits. They were simulating a hostile, isolated coastal environment where resources were completely cut off, food was scarce, and endurance meant the difference between life and death. But for a seasoned soldier like David and a smart dog like Bruno, it felt like just another routine. Tuesday in the mud. "Keep your nose down and focus, buddy," David whispered softly, adjusting the heavy tactical pack that dug into his tired shoulders. Bruno offered a low, affirmative huff in response, his large ears swiveling constantly like radar dishes to catch the subtle sounds of snapping twigs, rustling leaves, and the distant rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves against the rocky shore. After another hour of hard hiking, they stopped near a large rocky outcrop to take a quick rest and review their navigation coordinates. David pulled out a small, waterproof topographical map and laid it flat on a smooth gray stone. He then reached into his tactical side pouch, his fingers searching for a piece of dried beef jerky. It was his only allotted food ration for the next 12 hours of the mission. "All right, Bruno, look here. We are about 3 miles away from the primary extraction point," David muttered, tracing a dirty finger along a contour line on the map. He held the precious piece of beef jerky loosely in his left hand, his eyes completely focused on the paper. Suddenly, a gentle, warm, and extremely swift movement brushed against his knuckles. David looked down just in time to see the very last inch of his beef jerky disappearing into Bruno's mouth. The big dog chewed happily, his thick tail wagging in a slow, perfectly innocent rhythm against the dirt. "Are you kidding me right now?" David asked aloud, crossing his strong arms over his chest. "That was my lunch, you greedy thief. You have your own dog food." Bruno simply looked up, swallowed the delicious treat in one big gulp, and gave a soft, happy bark. He even raised his right paw, offering it to David as if demanding a friendly handshake for a job well executed. David stared at the dog for a moment before he couldn't help but laugh out loud, shaking his head as he reached down to rub the thick, soft fur behind Bruno's ears. "You are extremely lucky that you are such a good boy," David said with a heavy sigh. "Otherwise, I would make you carry the heavy radio equipment for the rest of the day." Bruno just panted happily, his pink tongue hanging out, clearly completely unbothered by the empty threat and fully ready to continue their long trek through the damp woods. However, their quiet, peaceful moment of camaraderie was suddenly and rudely shattered by a deep, vibrating bass that echoed loudly through the ancient trees. It was definitely not the sound of nature, nor was it the familiar rumble of military transport vehicles. It was high-energy, modern pop music, and it was playing at an absolutely ear-splitting volume. David frowned deeply, quickly packing up his map and securing his gear. He signaled Bruno to follow closely, and they pushed quietly through the final thick line of trees until they reached the very edge of a high, steep cliff that overlooked the vast ocean. Down below, anchored dangerously close to the sharp, unforgiving rocky shore, was a massive, gleaming white luxury yacht. On the very top deck of the expensive vessel stood Victoria, the notoriously wealthy CEO of the nearby exclusive private beach resort. She was a slender woman, wearing oversized, dark designer sunglasses, a flowing white silk beach dress, and a haughty, annoyed expression that strongly suggested she believed she owned the ocean and everything in it. She held a crystal champagne glass in one hand, shouting angry orders at her boat crew to turn the party music up even louder. David pulled out his military binoculars to get a better look at the absurd scene, shaking his head in total disbelief. "Rich civilians," he muttered under his breath. "They really think the whole wild world is just their personal nightclub." Bruno whined softly, pressing his head against David's leg, clearly irritated by the loud noise that was currently hurting his highly sensitive canine ears. Victoria was throwing a lavish, noisy boat party, completely ignoring the basic safety protocols of the unpredictable coastal waters. She seemed entirely focused on a live video call on her tablet, posing dramatically and smiling brightly to impress her wealthy business investors back in the city. Unfortunately, the incredibly loud music successfully masked a much more pressing and immediate danger. While Victoria danced carelessly on the wooden deck, David noticed the coastal wind shifting very rapidly. The surrounding air grew suddenly and biting cold, and the previously gentle, salty breeze quickly turned into sharp, stinging gusts that whipped through the trees. He looked out at the far horizon, where the previously dull gray clouds were now rapidly morphing into a terrifying, unnatural shade of pitch black. A thick, solid wall of dark clouds and churning water was moving toward the fragile coast at an alarming speed. It was a severe summer squall, a sudden and highly violent storm that could easily tear small vessels apart in a matter of minutes. David quickly reached for his shoulder radio, his instincts kicking into high gear. "Base, this is Echo 2. We have a massive, fast-moving weather front coming in from the east, requesting an immediate weather update." The radio crackled with heavy static for a few tense seconds before the serious voice of his commander finally broke through the noise. "Echo 2, be advised. A Category 3 squall is hitting your exact sector in less than 20 minutes. Seek immediate high ground shelter. All sea traffic in the area is strictly grounded by the Coast Guard." David looked back down at the bright white yacht, which was now bobbing heavily in the increasingly rough, choppy water. The pop music was still blasting loudly, and Victoria was still laughing happily into her glowing screen, completely blind and deaf to the massive wall of black water and howling wind rushing directly toward her from behind. "Bruno," David said, his voice dropping its previous playful, gentle tone and instantly shifting into pure, cold military focus. "We have a very big problem. That stupid boat is sitting right in the kill zone." Bruno let out a low, rumbling growl, his instincts sensing the dangerous change in the atmospheric pressure. The very first heavy, freezing drop of rain hit David's cheek, feeling almost like a tiny bullet. The dark sky suddenly roared with deafening thunder, completely drowning out the party music, signaling that the peaceful survival training exercise was officially over. The sudden drop in temperature was sharp and unforgiving, instantly turning the previously humid coastal air into a freezing, aggressive wind that violently shook the tall pine trees. David wasted absolutely no time. He quickly shoved his topographic map and remaining tactical gear back into his heavy waterproof backpack, securing every strap with practiced military efficiency. Beside him, Bruno stood perfectly still, his thick fur blowing wildly in the fierce wind, his intelligent brown eyes fixed intensely on the darkening horizon. The dog let out another low, rumbling growl, clearly sensing the massive atmospheric pressure dropping faster than a heavy stone. David reached for his shoulder radio again, his strong fingers adjusting the frequency dial through a heavy wall of loud static noise. The local Coast Guard channel was already broadcasting a desperate, automated emergency loop, officially declaring a strict, immediate ban on all maritime travel in the sector and ordering all vessels to return to port immediately. "Come on, buddy, we need to move fast," David commanded, his voice loud and firm to cut through the rising howl of the incoming storm. "Our training mission is officially paused. We need to find solid shelter on higher ground before those massive waves start crashing over the cliff." Bruno barked a short, sharp confirmation and immediately took the lead, using his powerful legs to expertly navigate the slippery, muddy path leading away from the dangerous cliff edge. They moved together with perfect synchronization, a well-oiled machine of man and dog, completely focused on survival. However, right before they disappeared into the safety of the dense protective forest, David stopped and turned his head back for one final look at the ocean. The sight below made his stomach twist into a tight, uncomfortable knot of dread. The once calm, sparkling blue water was now a terrifying, violently churning washing machine of dark gray foam and massive rolling waves. And right in the middle of that deadly chaos, the bright white luxury yacht was violently rocking back and forth, looking incredibly small and incredibly fragile against the terrifying power of Mother Nature. Down on the violently pitching deck of the luxury yacht, the atmosphere had shifted rapidly from a loud, arrogant party to a tense, extremely dangerous standoff. Captain Miller, a tough, older man with a deeply weathered face, a thick gray beard, and a neat white maritime uniform, stumbled out of the wheelhouse. He gripped the slippery metal railing tightly to keep his balance as another massive wave slammed heavily into the side of the expensive vessel. He desperately searched for Victoria, finally finding her standing under a thin canvas canopy, still stubbornly holding her expensive tablet high in the air to avoid the rain. "Miss Victoria, we have to cut the engines and turn back toward the marina right this second," Captain Miller shouted loudly, his rough voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the howling wind and crashing thunder. "This is not a regular summer rain shower. It is a Category 3 squall. The Coast Guard has completely closed the ocean." Victoria, however, completely ignored his desperate, urgent warning. She simply rolled her heavily mascaraed eyes, aggressively brushing her wet, ruined hair out of her annoyed face. She was right in the middle of a crucial, multi-million-dollar live video pitch with her most important city investors, and she was absolutely furious that the loud storm was ruining her perfect, glamorous background. "Are you deaf, Captain?" she shrieked back, covering the microphone of her tablet with one perfectly manicured hand. "I am closing a massive resort expansion deal right now. Do not interrupt me with your stupid weather paranoia. I pay you extremely well to drive this boat, not to give me uninvited advice. Keep the yacht steady and turn the party music back on, so my investors think we are having a wonderful time." Captain Miller stared at her in absolute disbelief, his experienced eyes wide with genuine terror. He had sailed these unpredictable coastal waters for over 30 years, and he knew perfectly well that you simply do not argue with the angry ocean. "Miss, if we do not turn around right now, the waves will swamp the exhaust ports. We will lose all engine power," he pleaded, desperately pointing at the terrifying wall of black water rushing toward them. But Victoria just turned her back on him, flashing a fake, overly bright smile at her tablet screen, completely choosing her greedy business ambitions over the basic safety of her entire crew. Victoria's foolish, arrogant decision yielded disastrous, immediate consequences. Less than 2 minutes later, a truly monstrous, towering wave, easily 20 feet high, violently crashed directly over the rear deck of the luxury yacht. The massive, crushing weight of the freezing salt water instantly shattered the fragile glass windows of the lower cabin and completely flooded the main engine room. A loud, sickening mechanical grinding noise echoed from deep within the belly of the expensive vessel, followed instantly by a thick plume of black, greasy smoke pouring out of the rear exhaust vents. The deep, rhythmic humming of the powerful yacht engines suddenly sputtered, choked, and completely died. The boat was now completely powerless, a helpless, dead piece of floating metal trapped in the middle of a violently churning, deadly ocean. Total panic erupted instantly. The loud party music finally cut off, replaced entirely by the terrifying, high-pitched screams of the terrified crew members and Victoria herself. She dropped her expensive tablet onto the flooded wooden deck, watching helplessly as it short-circuited and sparked before being completely swept away by a rushing wave. The luxury yacht immediately turned sideways, completely caught in the brutal, unforgiving grip of the massive rolling waves. It began to tilt dangerously to the left side, cold water pouring heavily over the expensive white railings. Up on the high, muddy cliff, David was just about to step into the safety of the dark forest when a sudden, bright burst of blinding red light violently tore through the thick gray curtain of the heavy rain. He spun around instantly, his sharp military eyes locking onto the sky. It was a maritime distress flare, burning brightly and desperately against the black storm clouds. He looked down at the raging ocean and saw the horrible truth. The multi-million-dollar yacht was dead in the water, taking on heavy waves and rapidly beginning to sink into the freezing, dark depths. "No, no, no," David muttered, his heart hammering loudly against his ribs. He looked down at Bruno, who was already staring intensely at the sinking boat, the dog's ears pinned back and his entire muscular body completely tense, fully ready for action. The strict military order was to stay put and seek high ground shelter, but David knew with absolute certainty that no Coast Guard rescue helicopter could possibly reach them in time through this violent, heavy wind. If he simply walked away now, everyone on that foolish sinking boat would definitely drown. The heavy military radio strapped to David's shoulder crackled to life once more, cutting through the deafening roar of the storm with a sharp robotic voice. "All units, this is command. Do not attempt water rescues. I repeat, hold your positions. Coast Guard deployment is delayed due to severe wind shear. Stay completely out of the water." David stood perfectly still on the muddy edge of the high cliff, his strong jaw clenched tightly as the icy rain violently battered his face. Down below, the massive luxury yacht was clearly losing its desperate battle against the angry ocean. The rear deck was already completely submerged under the dark water, and the terrified, high-pitched screams of the people on board were barely audible over the crashing thunder. David knew the strict military protocols perfectly well. Disobeying a direct, clear order during a severe weather event was a serious offense that could end his long SEAL career immediately. But he also knew that waiting for a delayed rescue helicopter simply meant watching those innocent people drown in the freezing, violent waves. He looked down at Bruno. The large, muscular German shepherd was not seeking shelter or acting afraid. Instead, he was standing right at the very edge of the dangerous drop, his ears flat against his wet head, barking fiercely at the black water below. "I know, buddy!" David yelled loudly over the howling wind, quickly unbuckling his heavy tactical backpack and dropping it onto the wet grass to reduce his swimming weight. "We cannot just stand here and watch them die. We are going in." Bruno barked loudly in agreement, his highly intelligent brown eyes locking onto David with absolute, unwavering loyalty. Without another second of hesitation, David grabbed a thick coil of emergency rescue rope from his discarded bag, tied one end securely around his strong waist, and began the dangerous, slippery climb down the steep, jagged rocks toward the boiling ocean, with his brave dog following right behind him. The exact moment they hit the violently churning water, the freezing temperature shocked David's system like a heavy physical blow. The waves were absolutely monstrous, rising like dark, solid walls before crashing down with terrifying, crushing force. But David was a highly trained military soldier, and the ocean was his second home. He fought through the violent, chaotic current with powerful, measured strokes, his eyes fixed firmly on the sinking white vessel. Right beside him, displaying an incredible level of pure courage, was Bruno. The heavy storm and the towering waves would have easily panicked any normal animal, but Bruno was a seasoned military working dog. He paddled forward with immense physical strength, his head held high above the white, salty foam, completely ignoring the chaotic, deafening noise of the raging storm. "Good boy, Bruno. Keep moving forward," David shouted loud encouragement, swallowing a bitter mouthful of salty water as a rogue wave washed violently over them. The brave dog simply sneezed the dirty water out of his nose and continued swimming powerfully, perfectly matching his human partner's relentless, steady pace. They carefully navigated through a highly dangerous field of floating wooden debris, broken deck chairs, and shattered glass from the ruined yacht, finally reaching the violently tilting side of the doomed, sinking vessel. The situation on the dying yacht was absolute chaos. Captain Miller, the older man with the thick gray beard, was desperately clinging to a broken metal railing near the front of the boat, a deep bleeding cut on his forehead making him dizzy and weak. Not far from him, Victoria was completely hysterical, screaming loudly and thrashing wildly in the rising cold water, her expensive white silk dress now completely soaked and heavy, threatening to pull her down into the deep. "Help me! Do not let me die here," she shrieked in pure, uncontrollable terror. David swam directly toward the injured older captain first. He quickly grabbed a bright orange circular lifebuoy floating nearby and pushed it directly toward the bleeding man. "Grab the ring, sir! Hold on tight!" David commanded loudly with his authoritative voice. He then took the thick rope attached to the lifebuoy and placed it gently but firmly into Bruno's strong jaws. "Bruno, take it! Pull him to the shore! Go!" The brave German shepherd bit down hard on the thick rope, let out a muffled grunt of effort, and immediately began swimming back toward the rocky beach, his powerful legs working endlessly to pull the heavy injured captain safely through the crashing waves. With the captain secured, David turned his full attention to the panicked CEO. He swam over and grabbed Victoria by the back of her bright yellow life vest, but she panicked completely, wrapping her arms tightly around David's neck and accidentally pushing his head deep under the dark water. "Stop fighting me, or we will both drown," David yelled sharply, forcing his head back above the surface and grabbing her arms with his strong hands to break her dangerous grip. He secured a firm hold across her chest, using his other arm to swim with everything he had left. The ocean seemed furious that they were escaping, sending massive waves to push them back, but David fought with the ultimate determination of a seal. Just as David's heavy boots finally touched the solid, sandy bottom near the shore, a massive, sickening crunch echoed loudly behind them. The multi-million-dollar luxury yacht completely gave up, its broken nose pointing straight up to the dark, stormy sky before it slipped silently and rapidly beneath the violent black waves, disappearing forever into the deep ocean. David dragged the sobbing, exhausted Victoria onto the wet sand, collapsing heavily next to Bruno and the coughing captain, all of them completely drained, but miraculously alive. The cold, biting wind of the severe summer squall continued to whip aggressively across the dark, sandy beach. But the immediate, deadly threat of the crushing ocean waves was finally behind them. David lay flat on his back on the wet sand for a brief moment, his broad chest heaving heavily as he desperately pulled freezing air into his burning lungs. Next to him, Captain Miller coughed violently, spitting up bitter seawater, his weathered face extremely pale and his hands shaking from the terrible shock of the sinking vessel. A few yards away, Victoria sat awkwardly in the mud, her expensive white silk dress now a ruined, heavy mess of dark stains, torn fabric, and sticky seaweed. The loud, terrifying roar of the angry ocean completely filled the silence between them as they all stared blankly out at the dark, violently churning water. The massive, gleaming white luxury yacht, a multi-million-dollar symbol of ultimate wealth and power, was completely gone, swallowed whole by the unforgiving depths in a matter of minutes. As Victoria stared at the empty gray horizon, the pure initial shock of her near-death experience quickly transformed into a cold, sharp panic of a completely different kind. Her mind raced aggressively, calculating the devastating financial consequences of her highly foolish actions. She had specifically ignored the strict maritime weather warnings. She had aggressively yelled at her experienced captain to keep the boat in the dangerous water. And worst of all, she had done it all while on a live recorded video call with her most powerful, unforgiving business investors. They had clearly seen the dark water crash They had seen her drop the communication tablet in panic. The wealthy shareholders of her private beach resort would absolutely destroy her in a legal court. They would sue her for gross negligence, strip away her prestigious CEO title, and leave her completely bankrupt. She desperately needed someone else to take the heavy blame for the catastrophic loss of the expensive yacht, and she needed it immediately. Her cold, calculating eyes slowly shifted away from the dark ocean and locked intensely onto the exhausted military soldier resting on the sand. David slowly pushed himself up from the wet sand, his strong muscles aching painfully from the brutal, freezing swim. He immediately crawled over to the older captain, using his basic military medical training to carefully inspect the deep, bleeding cut on the man's forehead. "You are going to be fine, Captain," David said with a firm, reassuring voice, pressing a clean piece of cloth against the wound to stop the steady bleeding. "Just keep breathing slowly and stay awake." Right at that moment, Bruno happily trotted up onto the beach, his thick black and tan fur completely soaked and heavily matted with sticky salt water and gray sand. The brave German shepherd was completely unbothered by the terrifying ordeal they had just survived. In fact, he seemed rather pleased to be back on solid, reliable ground. Following his natural canine instincts, Bruno stopped right next to where Victoria was sitting, planted his strong paws firmly in the dirt, and violently shook his entire muscular body. A massive, dirty shower of freezing salt water, wet sand, and tiny pieces of sharp shells flew directly onto Victoria's ruined designer dress and her perfectly manicured face. Victoria gasped loudly, her eyes wide with absolute horror, as she wiped the dirty, gritty mud from her cheek. "Get this disgusting, filthy beast away from me right now!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice easily cutting through the loud, howling wind. She scrambled backward in the wet sand, pointing an angry, shaking finger at the happy dog. "He is an absolute menace to society." David frowned deeply, standing up to his full height and placing a protective, gentle hand on Bruno's wet head. "This beast just risked his own life to pull your captain out of the freezing water," David replied calmly, his voice cold and flat with military discipline. "You should be thanking him on your knees instead of screaming at him." Bruno simply looked at the angry woman, tilted his head slightly to the side in innocent confusion, and let out a soft, wet sneeze, completely unaware of the deep, venomous hatred brewing in her dark eyes. Before David could say another word, the bright, flashing red and blue lights of an emergency response vehicle violently pierced through the dark, heavy rain. A large, rugged Coast Guard truck roared onto the sandy beach, its heavy tires tearing loudly through the mud. Two officers quickly jumped out, their bright orange waterproof rescue jackets glowing intensely against the dark storm. The lead officer, a stern, sharp-eyed man named Officer Hayes, ran quickly toward the group, holding a heavy medical kit and a large waterproof flashlight. "Is everyone all right here? We received a distress signal just before the entire sector went completely dark," Officer Hayes shouted loudly, shining his bright light over the exhausted, soaking wet group. Before David or Captain Miller could even open their mouths to explain the terrifying situation, Victoria dramatically threw herself forward onto the wet sand. She let out a loud, theatrical sob, forcing fake, heavy tears to stream down her dirty face. She looked up at Officer Hayes with the wide, innocent eyes of a helpless, traumatized victim. "Oh, thank God you are finally here, officer," she cried loudly, her voice trembling with completely fake terror. "It was horrible, absolutely horrible. We were just trying to return safely to the marina before the bad weather hit." Officer Hayes knelt down quickly, his serious face full of genuine concern. "What happened to your vessel, ma'am? Did the massive waves swamp the main engine room?" Victoria shook her head aggressively, pointing a sharp, accusing finger directly at David and his loyal dog. "No, it was him! This crazy military man and his highly dangerous, out-of-control dog," she lied boldly, without a single ounce of hesitation. "They were recklessly driving a small, stolen military motorboat in the storm. They completely lost control and violently rammed their heavy metal boat directly into the side of my luxury yacht. They smashed a massive hole in my hull and caused my beautiful ship to sink instantly. My poor captain hit his head when they violently crashed into us." David stood completely frozen in absolute shock, his jaw dropping slightly as he listened to the sheer, unbelievable audacity of her disgusting lie. He had just risked his military career and his own life to save this horrible woman from drowning, and she was looking right into the eyes of the law, effortlessly framing him for the entire disaster. The harsh fluorescent lights of the military base interrogation room buzzed loudly overhead, casting long, tired shadows across David's exhausted face. It had only been 24 hours since the violent storm, but the terrible nightmare was just beginning. Commander Reed, a strict, older man with a heavily lined face and a perfectly pressed uniform, sat across the cold metal table with a thick file of official complaints. "I am sorry, David, but my hands are completely tied on this matter," Commander Reed said with a heavy, disappointed sigh. "Victoria has filed a massive, multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against the Navy, specifically naming you as the primary cause of her sunken yacht. She claims you recklessly drove a stolen motorboat into her vessel." David slammed his strong fist onto the table, his deep voice filled with pure, raw frustration. "That is an absolute lie, sir. We did not have a boat. We swam through massive waves to save her life and the life of her injured captain." Commander Reed shook his head slowly, looking down at the paperwork. "Captain Miller is currently in a deep coma at the city hospital due to his severe head injury. He cannot testify or confirm your story. Victoria, however, has extremely expensive lawyers and a very loud public voice. Until the official military investigation is fully complete, you are stripped of your active duty status. You are officially suspended, David. You must hand over your badge and your weapon immediately." David felt a cold, heavy weight settle deep in his stomach. He was a proud, dedicated SEAL, and being forced to step down felt like a physical blow. But the absolute worst news was yet to come. Miles away from the military base, inside the luxurious top-floor penthouse of the exclusive beach resort, a young man named Sam was quietly pushing a heavy vacuum cleaner across the expensive carpet. Sam was a nervous, skinny 20-year-old housekeeper with messy brown hair, wearing a simple, neat white resort uniform. He always kept his head down and tried his best to remain invisible while he worked. As he moved closer to the large, open double doors of the master bedroom, he suddenly heard Victoria's sharp, arrogant voice echoing from the balcony. Sam immediately stopped the loud vacuum cleaner, freezing in place. Victoria was pacing back and forth, holding a sleek gold phone to her ear, laughing coldly. "Yes, exactly, Charles. We must push the false narrative as hard as possible to the media," she said, taking a sip from a fresh glass of champagne. "The greedy shareholders are actually backing off now. They completely believe my story that the crazy, aggressive military soldier and his wild, dangerous dog rammed their little boat into my yacht. It is almost too easy to manipulate the truth when you have this much money." Sam felt his heart hammer loudly against his thin ribs. He knew the truth now. He knew the brave soldier was completely innocent. He wanted to run straight to the local police station and tell them everything he had just heard. But then he looked around at the incredibly expensive room, remembering how powerful and ruthless his wealthy boss was. If he spoke up, she would definitely fire him ruin his life, and probably sue him too. Overwhelmed by deep fear and helpless panic, Sam quietly turned the vacuum cleaner back on, choosing to hide his face and bury the dangerous truth out of pure cowardice. The heavy, dark clouds of the storm had finally passed, but a deep, suffocating gloom hung over David's small, quiet house near the base. A loud, sharp knock on the front door shattered the heavy silence. David opened it to find two serious-looking men in dark green uniforms standing on his porch. They were from the city animal control department. One of them, a tall, burly man carrying a thick metal catch pole, stepped forward with a stern expression. "Are you David? We have a court-ordered warrant to seize a large German shepherd named Bruno," the man stated coldly, handing David a piece of official legal paper. "A wealthy citizen has filed a dangerous animal report claiming this dog violently attacked her on the beach. By city law, the animal must be immediately confiscated and placed in a secure quarantine facility pending a judge's final decision." David's blood ran completely cold. He stepped aggressively into the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the entrance. "You are not taking my dog. He is a highly trained military working dog, and he saved a man's life yesterday. That woman is a completely lying snake." The second officer pulled out a pair of heavy leather gloves, his face lacking any sympathy. "Sir, if you interfere with a legal city warrant, we will call the police and you will be arrested on the spot. Bring the dog out right now." From inside the small house, Bruno let out a soft, confused whine. He trotted to the door, his deep brown eyes looking up at David for guidance. David slowly dropped to his knees on the wooden floor, pulling the large, brave dog into a tight, desperate hug. He buried his face deep into Bruno's thick, warm fur, his strong shoulders shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. "I am so sorry, buddy," David whispered, his voice cracking with heavy sadness. "I have to let them take you for now, but I promise you, I will fix this. I will come back for you." Bruno licked David's rough cheek gently, completely trusting his best friend. The officers stepped forward, awkwardly slipping a thick, heavy leather collar around Bruno's neck. They led the loyal dog out to a large, cold metal cage sitting in the back of their white truck. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a loud, final clank. Bruno stood up inside the small cage, pressing his nose against the metal wire, letting out a long, heartbreaking howl as the truck drove slowly away down the quiet street. David stood completely alone on his front porch, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, silently vowing to completely destroy Victoria's web of lies. The heavy, suffocating silence inside David's small house was completely unbearable without the familiar, comforting sound of Bruno's paws clicking against the wooden floor. David sat alone in his dark living room, staring blankly at the empty water bowl in the corner, his mind racing with a chaotic mix of deep anger and sharp anxiety. The official military investigation was moving far too slowly, completely tangled in endless legal paperwork and Victoria's aggressive, highly paid corporate lawyers. Captain Miller was still lying unconscious in a quiet hospital room, fighting for his life and unable to speak the truth. Meanwhile, Bruno was locked inside a cold, frightening metal cage at the city animal shelter, confused and entirely alone. David knew perfectly well that as a suspended soldier, he was strictly forbidden from interfering with an ongoing legal case. But he was a highly trained Navy SEAL, and SEALs simply do not abandon their loyal teammates. He absolutely refused to sit around and wait for a corrupt, cowardly CEO to destroy everything he cared about. Under the thick, dark cover of night, David dressed in simple, dark civilian clothing and drove his old truck quietly toward the massive, brightly lit luxury beach resort. He parked several blocks away to avoid the security cameras and moved silently through the thick coastal trees. For a professional soldier trained to infiltrate highly guarded enemy bases in hostile territories, sneaking into the back area of a civilian hotel was incredibly easy. He easily slipped past the sleepy security guards at the rear gate and moved like a dark shadow toward the staff quarters, hoping desperately to find a single honest witness who might have seen or heard the real truth about the boat crash. As David carefully navigated the narrow, dark alleyways behind the bustling main hotel kitchen, he suddenly heard the loud, heavy thud of a metal dumpster lid closing. He quickly pressed his back against the cold brick wall, peering cautiously around the corner. Standing near the large garbage bins was Sam, the nervous, skinny 20-year-old housekeeper with messy brown hair and a simple white resort uniform. Sam looked completely exhausted and incredibly terrified, constantly looking over his thin shoulder as if he expected a monster to jump out of the shadows. David took a slow, deep breath and stepped carefully into the dim yellow light of the alley, keeping his strong hands completely empty and visible to show he was not a threat. "Please do not run, Sam," David said softly, his deep voice calm and surprisingly gentle. "I am not here to hurt you or cause any trouble. I am the soldier from the beach, the man with the dog." Sam gasped loudly, dropping a black plastic garbage bag onto the dirty concrete. His wide eyes darted frantically toward the kitchen door, his whole body shaking with intense fear. You cannot be here, sir. Miss Victoria has security guards everywhere," Sam stammered, taking a slow step backward. "If she sees me talking to you, she will fire me instantly. She will ruin my entire life." David took one slow step forward, looking directly into the young man's terrified eyes with pure, honest sincerity. "Sam, my dog is locked in a cage because of her terrible lies. The old captain who tried to save her is in a deep coma. She is an absolute coward trying to frame innocent people to save her own money. If you know anything, if you heard anything at all, I am begging you to help me. I just need the truth." The heavy desperation in the strong soldier's voice finally broke through Sam's thick wall of fear. The young housekeeper covered his face with his shaking hands and began to cry softly. "I heard her on the phone today," Sam confessed in a quiet, broken whisper. "I was vacuuming near her private balcony. She was laughing with her rich lawyers. She told them that she completely made up the story about you crashing a small boat into her yacht. She said the greedy shareholders believed her fake story, and she was going to use her money to bury you and your dog forever." David felt a massive, fiery surge of righteous anger burning deep in his chest upon hearing the absolute confirmation of Victoria's disgusting cruelty. However, he quickly pushed the sharp anger down, placing a strong, reassuring hand on the crying young man's thin shoulder. "Thank you, Sam. You are a good, brave man for telling me this," David said firmly. "But unfortunately, your honest words are simply not enough. Victoria's expensive lawyers will easily destroy a young housekeeper in a legal courtroom. They will call you a liar or say you misunderstood the phone call. We desperately need hard physical proof. We need something undeniable that she cannot possibly lie her way out of." David gave Sam a gentle pat on the back, told the young man to go back inside and stay perfectly safe, and then quickly melted back into the dark shadows of the resort. He walked briskly back to his hidden truck, feeling a heavy, crushing weight of frustration settling over his tired shoulders. He sat heavily in the driver's seat, staring blankly out the windshield at the dark street. He mentally retraced every single step of that chaotic, violent day. The heavy mud, the hard hiking, the stolen beef jerky, the loud party music, the massive storm, the freezing ocean water. He squeezed his eyes tightly shut, thinking specifically about the early morning military briefing with Commander Reed before the survival exercise began. Suddenly, his eyes snapped wide open in the dark cabin. His heart started to hammer wildly against his ribs, and the heavy air in his lungs suddenly felt extremely light. He remembered securing a very specific, highly important piece of military equipment directly onto Bruno's thick tactical collar right before they entered the wet woods. It was a standard required procedure for this specific type of advanced survival exercise to monitor the canine's performance. David's strong hands began to shake slightly with pure, overwhelming excitement as a massive, triumphant smile slowly spread across his exhausted face. He reached quickly for his phone to call his commander. He finally realized that he held the ultimate weapon to completely destroy Victoria's web of lies, and the undeniable truth had been swimming right next to him the entire time. The heavy oak doors of the military hearing room swung open wide, and pure justice finally walked through them. Commander Reed, the strict older man with the neat gray hair, stood proudly at the front of the quiet room and officially stamped a large red seal of approval onto David's military record. David, you are hereby fully reinstated to active military duty with a formal commendation for extreme bravery under incredibly dangerous circumstances, the commander announced with a rare, genuinely warm smile. To make the amazing victory even sweeter, Commander Reed informed David that Captain Miller had finally woken up from his deep, scary medical coma at the city hospital earlier that morning. The older captain had immediately spoken to the city police, fully confirming David and Bruno's heroic rescue, which hammered the absolute final nail into Victoria's legal coffin. On the other side of the large room, the scene was completely different and highly satisfying. Two stern civilian police officers, wearing dark blue uniforms and shiny silver badges, stepped forward heavily with cold metal handcuffs. Victoria, the formerly arrogant and incredibly wealthy resort CEO, looked absolutely pathetic, standing there in her expensive black suit. Her perfectly styled hair was a complete, wild mess, and she was crying real bitter tears of genuine defeat as the strict officers loudly read her legal rights for severe perjury and massive financial fraud. Her aggressive lawyer, Mr. Sterling, had already rushed quickly out the back door to save his own career, leaving her completely alone to face the devastating, horrible consequences of her own terrible lies. David did not even look back at the crying woman as he quickly grabbed his official military ID badge from the wooden table. He only had one highly important mission left on his mind, and he was absolutely not going to waste another single second inside that cold, formal building. The old engine of David's dark truck roared loudly as he sped quickly down the bright, sunny coastal highway toward the city animal control facility. When he finally pushed open the heavy glass doors of the busy animal shelter, he was immediately greeted by a deafening, chaotic chorus of barking dogs and meowing cats. Sarah, a kind-hearted young volunteer with bright red hair, pulled into a messy ponytail and a faded blue shelter apron, looked up brightly from the front reception desk. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked politely, holding a small clipboard. David quickly slapped his official legal release paperwork directly onto the counter, his broad chest heaving slightly from running all the way from the parking lot. "I am here right now to get my partner back," he said firmly, his deep voice thick with heavy, barely controlled emotion. Sarah smiled warmly, quickly checked the judge's signature on the official papers, and grabbed a heavy ring of metal keys from the wall. She led the tall, eager soldier down an incredibly long, noisy concrete hallway lined with dozens of cold metal cages. At the very end of the long row, sitting quietly in the dark, lonely corner with his big head resting sadly on his paws, was Bruno. The brave German shepherd looked up very slowly, his highly intelligent brown eyes instantly locking onto David's familiar, smiling face. The sad, quiet dog suddenly exploded into a wild, beautiful frenzy of pure, uncontrollable joy. He barked incredibly loudly, his thick black and tan fur shaking violently as his tail wagged hard enough to hit the metal walls with a loud thud. David dropped straight to his knees on the hard, dirty concrete floor the exact second Sarah unlocked the heavy metal door. Bruno burst out of the small cage like a furry rocket, violently knocking the strong seal backward onto the floor, licking his face aggressively and whining happily. "I know, buddy. I missed you too. I told you I would come back for you," David whispered softly, burying his face deep into the warm, familiar fur of his absolute best friend, finally feeling completely whole again. One beautiful, sunny week later, the heavy summer storm and the terrible military court hearing felt like a distant, rapidly fading nightmare. The entire SEAL team was gathered happily in David's small, green backyard for a massive, highly deserved weekend barbecue party. The bright, warm summer air was completely filled with loud, cheerful laughter and the absolutely delicious, mouth-watering smell of grilling meat. Marcus, a massive, highly muscular soldier with a completely shaved head and a bright, colorful Hawaiian shirt, was happily manning the large black grill, expertly flipping thick, juicy burgers with a long metal spatula. Even Commander Reed was there, wearing surprisingly casual civilian clothes and holding a cold bottle of soda, looking completely relaxed in a cheap folding chair. David stood up proudly near the long wooden picnic table, gently tapping a metal spoon against his glass to get everyone's attention. "All right, please listen up, team," David called out loudly, smiling broadly at his loyal, trusted friends. "I just want to say a massive thank you to all of you for standing firmly by me during that terrible mess. But most importantly, I want to raise a glass to the real, true hero of this entire crazy story." He pointed down at Bruno, who was currently sitting perfectly still on the green grass like a highly disciplined soldier, waiting patiently for a tasty treat. To Bruno, the absolute best, bravest partner a guy could ever ask for in his life. He is the ultimate good boy. The team cheered loudly, raising their cold drinks high in the sunny air. However, while everyone was completely distracted by the heartfelt, emotional toast, Bruno's excellent canine nose suddenly caught the irresistible scent of something truly amazing. He quickly dropped his disciplined military posture, stealthily crawling under the wooden table like a furry ninja. Right as Commander Reed turned his head away to laugh at a joke, Bruno silently popped his head up next to the hot grill, opened his strong jaws, and expertly snatched the absolute biggest, most perfectly cooked T-bone steak right off the commander's white paper plate. "Hey, that was my lunch!" Commander Reed yelled out, his eyes wide in sudden, complete shock. Bruno simply trotted proudly across the green grass with the massive, juicy steak hanging out of his mouth, his thick tail wagging happily in pure, delicious victory. The entire backyard instantly erupted into loud, roaring laughter. David just shook his head, smiling warmly up at the beautiful, sunny sky. The truth had finally won. The bad guy was in jail, his loyal best friend was safely home, and life was absolutely perfect once again. The large, oak-paneled military hearing room was extremely cold, highly intimidating, and completely silent except for the heavy ticking of a large clock on the wall. Commander Reed, the strict older man with a heavily lined face and neat gray hair, sat at the very head of the long wooden table, looking down at a massive pile of legal documents. David sat quietly across from him, wearing a simple, dark formal military uniform, his broad shoulders completely relaxed, despite the heavy tension and anxiety filling the air. On the opposite side of the large room sat Victoria. She had completely abandoned her glamorous, colorful resort clothes and was now wearing a very conservative, highly expensive black suit. She was aggressively dabbing her dry eyes with a soft white tissue, desperately trying to look like a fragile, highly traumatized victim. Right next to her stood her lead legal representative, Mr. Sterling. He was a tall, sharp-featured man in a perfectly tailored gray suit who looked exactly like an aggressive, hungry shark. "Commander Reed," Mr. Sterling began loudly, his confident voice easily filling the quiet room. "My wealthy client has suffered immense physical and emotional trauma, not to mention the total financial loss of a multi-million-dollar luxury vessel. This reckless, out-of-control soldier and his highly dangerous animal intentionally rammed a stolen military motorboat into her peaceful yacht during a severe storm. We demand his immediate and permanent dismissal from the Navy, and we will absolutely pursue heavy civilian criminal charges to the fullest extent of the law." Victoria nodded weakly, letting out another completely fake, theatrical sob. "It was absolutely terrifying," she whispered, looking directly at the official military stenographer to make sure her vicious lies were being recorded perfectly. "That crazy wild dog was barking so aggressively at us, and the angry soldier just drove right into my beautiful ship. I truly thought I was going to die because of their malicious, violent actions." David just stared at her calmly, his rugged face a completely blank mask of pure military discipline, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Commander Reed let out a heavy, exhausted sigh, removing his reading glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "David, the evidence presented by the civilian party is extremely severe and highly damaging," the older commander said sternly. "You have completely denied these serious allegations from the very beginning, but Captain Miller is still in a deep medical coma at the city hospital, and he cannot support your story. Do you have any actual physical proof to present to this disciplinary committee before I make my final official decision regarding your military career?" David slowly stood up from his wooden chair. He did not look angry, and he certainly did not look scared. Instead, a very calm, confident, and slightly triumphant smile appeared on his exhausted face. "Yes, Commander, I do have absolute, undeniable proof," David said clearly, his deep voice echoing powerfully in the large room. "On the morning of the survival exercise, per standard military training protocol, I attached a standard piece of recording equipment to my partner. Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the very back of the hearing room swung open. A younger military officer walked in briskly, carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside the plastic bag was a small, black, heavy-duty waterproof action camera. Victoria stopped her fake crying instantly. Her hands froze in midair, and her dark eyes locked onto the small device with a sudden, sharp flash of pure, cold panic. Mr. Sterling, the aggressive lawyer, frowned deeply and adjusted his expensive tie. "What is the meaning of this unexpected interruption?" he demanded loudly. David calmly pointed to the small black camera resting on the table. "Bruno is not just a simple pet. He is a highly trained, highly valuable military working dog. To properly evaluate his tactical movements, speed, and field responses during our advanced survival training, he was wearing a high-definition mini-action camera securely attached to his tactical collar. The camera is completely waterproof, completely shockproof, and it was actively recording high-quality audio and video the entire time we were in the ocean." The heavy silence that suddenly fell over the large hearing room was absolutely deafening. Commander Reed immediately ordered his technical staff to connect the small black camera to the large digital screen hanging on the wall. Victoria's face rapidly turned the sickly color of pale chalk as the bright screen flickered to life. The high-definition video started playing, showing everything perfectly from Bruno's unique, lower point of view. The high-quality microphone captured the deafening roar of the severe summer storm, but it also captured something much more important. The loud, obnoxious pop music blaring from the luxury yacht echoed clearly through the room's speakers. The video clearly showed the massive, terrifying wave hitting the side of the expensive white boat, entirely swamping the rear engines. The camera panned around the dark water, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was absolutely no small military motorboat anywhere in sight. The yacht simply broke down because Victoria selfishly forced her captain to stay in the dangerous storm. Then the video showed Bruno bravely swimming through the freezing, violent waves alongside David. The camera bobbed up and down in the dark water until it finally reached the side of the sinking yacht. Suddenly, Victoria's own loud, highly panicked voice filled the quiet military hearing room. "Help me! Do not let me die here!" she screamed wildly on the video. Bruno swam much closer to her in the footage, and the clear audio perfectly captured her looking directly at the brave dog. "Good boy, please help me," she sobbed desperately. The video then showed David professionally grabbing her yellow life vest and pulling her safely away just as the yacht cracked in half and sank. The video stopped, and the large screen went completely black. Mr. Sterling slowly closed his leather briefcase with a loud click, his face completely red with intense embarrassment, finally realizing his wealthy client had lied to him and completely ruined his legal reputation. Victoria sat completely frozen in her wooden chair, her mouth opening and closing in pure shock, entirely unable to form a single word. Commander Reed slammed his heavy wooden gavel onto the desk with immense force. "Victoria, you are under immediate military and civilian arrest for severe perjury, filing a false police report, and massive financial fraud," the commander announced with a furious, booming voice. The brilliant plot twist had finally sprung, and the absolute truth had destroyed her dark web of lies completely. If this story of loyalty, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below telling me what you would do if you were in David's shoes on that muddy beach, and share this video with a friend who loves dogs just as much as we do. Your support helps me bring more inspiring stories to life. See you in the next video.